Continuing with episode 4, Adonis was seen wearing a patient's gown, writhing in pain. He was surrounded by 4 nurses. However, their location didn't resemble a hospital. It was a bright place filled with flowers. At this moment, Adonis's body temperature, heart rate, and blood pressure were steadily rising. If this continued, his heart wouldn't endure. One of the nurses mentioned that humans were still unable to perform multidimensional teleportation. From her words, it could be assumed that they were witches. At that time, an elderly witch arrived. She stimulated Adonis's brain to return to normal. Nevertheless, Adonis continued to cry out in pain, mentioning Chloe's name. As it turned out, when Adonis was about to be executed by a female warrior, the warrior revealed her true identity as a witch. She used magic for duplication and faking her own death. This witch's name was Anna, and she was a witch who had infiltrated this realm along with Doroka. From the beginning, their plan was to revive Chloe. That's why Anna would help Adonis escape from there. Suddenly, Anna looked up at the sky and asked Mrs. Ophelia to take Adonis away. Then, a white spherical object carried Adonis away from there. Back in the present, Adonis, whose pain had subsided, wondered who the people in front of him were. After closer inspection, Adonis finally realized that this place was the Witch Kingdom. Following this, Adonis was wheeled in a wheelchair because he had not fully recovered. During the journey, he met 2 witches who seemed to be familiar with Chloe. They both claimed to have been taken care of by Chloe since they were children. After a brief conversation, Adonis continued his journey. He finally arrived to meet Mrs. Ophelia. At that moment, Adonis requested to be let off the wheelchair, feeling capable of walking on his own. However, Mrs. Ophelia advised against it. This place was a secret territory that humans couldn't enter. Bringing Adonis here was already very difficult and could have adverse effects on his body. Adonis also remembered being carried by the white spherical object. Mrs. Ophelia explained that she had invited Adonis to become Chloe's apprentice. It wasn't just Mrs. Ophelia and a few others who knew Chloe. Every witch in this kingdom knew her. She was stronger than anyone, very wise and cheerful. Despite being an ice-attributed witch, her heart was as warm as the sun. However, she was actually expelled from the Witch Kingdom. Adonis corrected by saying that Chloe wasn't expelled, but rather banished for teaching magic to a human. Chloe had never directly talked about it, but Adonis could feel it after living with her for a while. Mrs. Ophelia stated that magic was something irreplaceable for witches. Magic was proof of love and sacrifice bestowed by the god to guide humanity. That's why teaching magic to humans was considered taboo. Chloe accepted humans as her students. No one knew why she did it. At that moment, all the witches pleaded with Chloe to leave her student and return to the Witch Kingdom. But she responded with just one word, sorry. After recounting everything, Mrs. Ophelia was about to return Adonis's feather pen. Adonis, who was initially sitting in a wheelchair, forced himself to walk and retrieve it. Mrs. Ophelia mentioned that the pen was made of phoenix feathers and adorned with sea waves and red dragon eyes. It was Chloe who had made the pen for Adonis. In that moment, Adonis recalled the words of Doroka and Anna. He then asked Mrs. Ophelia if Chloe could truly be resurrected. Mrs. Ophelia stated that witches would not lie. Adonis felt relieved upon hearing this. He then looked up and found a strange sight before him. Mrs. Ophelia explained that the round object he was seeing was the Earth, his place of origin. They were now on the moon, where the Witch Kingdom was located. This place was untouchable by humans. The witches came here 10 years ago and established this sacred place for themselves. It was a new witch kingdom called Luna Milia. Adonis was led out of the kingdom area by Mrs. Ophelia. He had to wear an astronaut suit, while Mrs. Ophelia needed nothing. At that moment, Mrs. Ophelia talked about how science had revealed the true nature of humans. Perhaps God had created this spherical universe to prevent humans from seeing something beyond their capabilities because God was concerned about the future of humanity. Despite this, Adonis no longer believed in God after all he had been through. Outside the kingdom area, there were tombstones for deceased witches. Mrs. Ophelia continued her story. She said that humans were often blinded by misconceptions. They considered the night before dawn to be the darkest night. The opposite of love was indifference. In reality, the sky gradually brightened with the arrival of dawn. Then the opposite of love was hostility. Humans had also wrongly believed that witches contaminated humanity. What was even worse was that this belief was shared by the human king. Afterward, they re-entered the kingdom area. Mrs. Ophelia showed Adonis the tree of life. The tree was the one that gave birth to witches. Adonis was seeing it directly for the first time. Chloe didn't want to tell him much about the birth of witches. As already known, all witches were of the same gender. Unlike humans, they couldn't have offspring. So they received their lives from this tree and were born from fruit with divine power. The tree of life before them now was the last one brought from earth. All the other trees of life had been burned by humans. After digesting Mrs. Ophelia's words, Adonis suspected that perhaps Chloe could be resurrected through this tree of life. Mrs. Ophelia explained that the fruit attached to the tree of life at the moment was just an ordinary witch waiting to be born. However, to be born as Chloe, the fruit needed Adonis' power. Adonis still didn't fully understand. Mrs. Ophelia then explained that magic itself was the result of materializing thoughts. If Adonis could master written summoning magic, he could materialize anything with his thoughts. One example was memories. Memories were the source of life. If Adonis could transfer all his memories of Chloe to the fruit on the tree of life, there was a possibility that Chloe could be resurrected. After explaining everything, Mrs. Ophelia gave Adonis time to prepare for the ritual. Adonis lay near the tree of life. He still couldn't believe he could bring Chloe back. Suddenly, a witch approached him. It seemed she was a witch disguised as a warrior, Anna. Anna was still angry because Doroka died because of Adonis. However, Adonis seemed not to care. After all, it was the witch's plan to save him. Adonis felt it was unfair for him to be blamed. Anna then wondered why they would sacrifice their lives to save someone like Adonis. Adonis, upon hearing this, was cynical. The witches were doing it to exploit Chloe. Before Doroka died, she had informed Adonis about the witches who wanted to exploit Chloe. In addition, the witches who could survive in an atmosphere without wearing astronaut suits were busy creating a facility like this. That meant this place would be used as a cage for humans. Adonis suspected that the witches would likely abduct human slaves or children through multidimensional teleportation. After that, they would be taught written summoning magic and allowed to fight against humans themselves. The only way for the nearly extinct witches to defeat humans was by using substitute combat power. However, only Chloe could create the feather pen. That's why the witches wanted to resurrect her. Anna panicked because Adonis now knew everything. She pleaded with Adonis to help them, not wanting Doroka's sacrifice to be in vain. However, Adonis stated that his only desire was to resurrect Chloe. Then, if Chloe refused to help the witches, Adonis would also consider the witches as enemies. After that, Mrs. Ophelia, Adonis, and some other witches were preparing to start the ritual. Then, Adonis used written summoning magic to summon his memories of Chloe. Those memories were then placed into the fruit on the tree of life. While doing so, Adonis remembered when he and Chloe talked about constellations. Thanks to Chloe's teachings, Adonis had memorized many constellations. There was a constellation named Adonis, named by Chloe. However, it seemed that Chloe had somewhat forgotten that she had named a constellation after him. From that memory alone, Adonis felt that nothing could replace the time they had spent together. Thinking about it, Adonis felt like he was dreaming. Adonis also recalled another memory. Chloe, who was casually undressing while taking a bath, left her clothes on the floor. When passing by the bath area, her curtain accidentally opened a bit, allowing Adonis to see Chloe. Chloe's body was covered in bruises. Chloe, realizing this, warned Adonis not to peek. Adonis, with mixed feelings of embarrassment and pity, tried to change the subject. He also reminded Chloe not to bathe for too long, as pursuers could appear at any time. At that moment, Chloe suddenly cried. She felt grateful because Adonis was always there for her. If it weren't for Adonis, Chloe believed she wouldn't be able to survive in this world. And now, Adonis felt the same way about Chloe. Slowly, all his memories of Chloe entered the fruit on the tree of life, until eventually the fruit gave birth to a witch. However, the witch who was born did not look like Chloe. For some reason, this witch looked more like Doroka with pink hair.